Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the Round Trip Stories podcast, where we share stories of moving around the world and back again, reflecting on the lessons we've learned along the way. My name is Tracy.
And my name is Melissa, and we are so glad you're joining us for today's episode. Our guest today is Dave Darval, bush pilot turned commercial pilot and husband to Ginger Darval of episodes 76 and 77. Dave picks up where Ginger left off in the story of their forming a family in the mid-1970s and going abroad for Dave's work in aeronautics. First, they were off to train pilots in Saudi Arabia and then to fly Cessna bush planes for Mission Aviation Fellowship in the mountains of Colombia. Listen as Dave shares his stories of starting his young family and honing his precision landings in the grass landing strips surrounded by rainforests. So buckle your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables and seats are in their upright positions as part one of Dave's round trip story gets ready for takeoff.
Dave Darval, thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast today. Welcome to the Round Trip Stories podcast.
My pleasure, Tracy. Good to be here.
This is the first time that we are interviewing a couple. So we had Ginger on just recently, and now we're getting to carry on with that story by interviewing and sharing Dave's story. So this is a fun sort of experiment for us to get to hear different parts of the stories from both angles. So thanks to both of you for sharing with us.
Oh, Ginger loved it. I'm sure I will too.
Audience, if you had not listened to Ginger's story, please go back and listen to her story. And now Dave's going to pick up and talk about their family and their experiences outside of the U.S. So Dave, thanks so much for coming on. And we've never had a pilot before, so we are looking forward to hearing your stories from the air and the ground both.
Well, as we get started, we like to start with a bit of the backstory. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your family, including where you grew up.
Sure, Melissa. I'm a 73-year-old retired airline pilot. I grew up in East San Diego County, California, a town called El Cajon. And while in high school there, I won an American Field Service scholarship to live with a family in Quito, Ecuador. He was actually the Minister of Government. It's like the Secretary of State of Ecuador. So they lived in a pretty fancy house.
That does sound fancy.
It was my first exposure to a foreign culture, but it was not exactly normal Ecuadorian culture, if you know what I mean.
Right.
But I loved my time there. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of Spanish, which was very helpful later. When I graduated from high school, I attended UCSD in La Jolla, and I got an engineering degree. Ginger and I currently live in Fresno, California. We'll be celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary next month.
So by the time this episode airs, you will have been married for 50 years. Congratulations.
Oh, yes, I love that. It's such a great example of marriages, right? That they can last a long time. And I hope this is like a anniversary gift to you both.
So tell us a little bit about when you moved abroad and where you went and what you did at that point.
Okay. Well, as a family, our first experience abroad was, in all places, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And people's minds just exploded when we said that. From 1979 to 1981, you see, I was hired by Transworld Airlines, TWA, to train Saudi graduates in aeronautics. That included some math, some engineering, but mostly how airplanes fly, basics of what you would learn first in a ground school for new pilots. And most of our students eventually trained in Florida to be pilots for the national airline Saudia, or Saudi Arabian Airlines. Now, when I went, I had to stay there without the family in bachelor's quarters for the first 3 months while waiting for suitable housing to become available for the family. And when Ginger and the kids arrived, our oldest, Jenny, was almost 2 years old.
Okay.
Um, Somewhere in there, Ginger gave birth to our first son, Matt, and she did so in a Saudi hospital.
All right.
Yeah, her obstetrician was Egyptian, the attending nurse was British, and our friends were so surprised that she would stay in Saudi Arabia to give birth.
Mm-hmm.
But you might have learned from Ginger on her round trip story that she was working in a Ecuadorian hospital growing up there and then later became a registered nurse. So she doesn't have the kind of mindset that a lot of Americans have that everywhere outside of the USA is dangerous medically.
Right. Right.
So the reality is the facilities were very good there in Jeddah. The doctors were mostly American or British trained, and that's not the
Mhm.
only foreign city in which Ginger gave birth. In 1985, we traveled to San Jose, Costa Rica for Spanish language school, preparing
Mhm.
for our next foreign adventure. And during our year there, Ginger gave birth to our second son, Steve. So all of our children were born in a different country.
That's fun.
Yeah.
How long were you and Ginger married before you guys went to Saudi Arabia?
So we had been married for 4 almost 4.5 years
Okay.
at that point. So then after language school, we went to Monteria in Northwest Colombia. I'd recently obtained a commercial pilot license with specialized training in bush flying. I was also a licensed aircraft mechanic. So we moved there to work with a Christian missions organization called Mission Aviation Fellowship.
Mhm.
In Spanish-speaking countries, it's called Alas de Socorro, or Wings of
Mm.
Mercy, or Wings of Help. And that organization specializes in air transport for missionaries and local pastors in and out of very isolated regions. And we utilized Cessna aircraft suitable for the undeveloped airstrips in that region.
All right, thank you, Dave. So now we're going to go ahead and get to your description of how things went abroad for this part one. Please tell us a story about your initial transition and adjustment.
Let's talk about Colombia here. If you've ever visited the Louisiana Bayou,
I'm hot already.
you might have a feel for what the climate was like in Monteria. Very hot and very humid.
Mhm.
That was a huge adjustment for all of us. The children were 7, 4, and 1 the
Mhm.
year we arrived. The 2 older kids attended a local private school, and of course, they had a hard time with the language.
Was it a private school where the instruction was in Spanish?
It was in Spanish. It was a private Catholic school.
Okay.
So they had a hard time with the language. They really struggled. Even though our language school training I would call semi-adequate, even Jenny and Matt got some private tutoring there during
Mhm.
our time in San Jose. But here's the deal. The Colombians in that part of the country spoke very rapidly and often dropped the last letter or middle letters of certain words.
Uh-huh.
So it was really hard for us to comprehend the dialect when we first got there,
Mm.
and especially for the kids. So we ended up taking them out of the local school, and we homeschooled them with an English correspondence course appropriate to their grade level.
Mm.
We hired a young woman to help with cooking and the cleaning while Ginger taught the kids, and she was a godsend.
Mhm.
Her name was Yadira, and the kids loved her. They'd sometimes watch Colombian soap operas on TV with Yadi, and I'd hear them just laughing their heads off upstairs in the room where the television was. Um,
Mhm.
and it helped them learn the language better.
Yeah. Mhm.
that was how they learn language, listening to
Yeah.
Spanish on TV.
Yeah.
Yachty also helped Ginger with the flight following. That's the tracking the location of our 2 aircraft, when they were flying out in the remote areas. And
Yeah, that was not so easy back then as it is now with all of our GPS
exactly.
tracking abilities.
There was none of that. Yeah,
No.
it was all by map, and after you'd done it for a while, you knew what heading to take up, and you just went and got to know all the landmarks along the way. But our flight following, was very important because the types of strips we operated at were, very limited. They were short, narrow, surrounded by trees, and, so because that kind of threat was so great, we established a system of flight following where before taking off, you would announce about to depart, for example, Sisa.
Mhm.
And then once you were in the air, you'd say, "En el aire para Chigorodo," in the air for Chigorodo. And then on short final for Chigorodo, you'd say final Chigorodo. And then once on the ground, en tierra Chigorodo or landed Chigorodo. And so if you announce on final, but you did not send a message that you were safely on the ground, um, we went out looking. And that was tough, for the wives doing the flight following because if they couldn't hear anything, they got really worried.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it was the most safe thing to do, but
Yeah.
we were there, we wanted to keep operating.
You've talked about the initial transition and some difficult things, but tell us another story about what was hard.
Well, for me, flying into remote areas with, some really short and poorly maintained airstrips, my skills were very challenged. But gradually they got honed to a finer degree. But safety was always my first priority. So sometimes if the grass on the strip had been allowed to grow too long or the trees at the end of the strip had grown too tall,
Mm.
I would pass on landing there that day. And I'd send word to the local airstrip coordinator to do the work that was needed. And we all did that, and it was important to do that.
Mhm.
Um, we had some airstrips that had been too neglected for years and some that no longer met the strict safety standards of our organization.
Mhm.
And in fact, I refused to operate into 3 of those strips at all. That caused a lot of friction between me and MEF's regional safety officer, but I stuck by my guns. I didn't make any friends
Mhm.
over that at all.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I felt very strongly about it. The organization had written standards that we had to follow, and none of these airstrips met those standards at all, not even close.
Yeah.
So, one of those strips was ultimately a contributing factor to MAF closing the Colombia program,
Wow.
and that really, brings me to the hardest experience of our time there. There were actually 3 pilots and their families in the program, and after we'd been in Monteria for about a year, one family left for a year-long furlough in the States, leaving just 2 of us to share the work, and soon I had to go to the capital, Bogota, for some required pilot exams. So the program manager was trying to do all the flying by himself. Now, the day that I returned from Bogota, his wife came to our house at about 6 p.m. to tell us that her husband had not checked in by radio since 10 o'clock in the morning
Mm.
and had not returned home or to our hangar in Monteria.
Oh, no.
And she said they'd had very little sleep the night before because there was a loud party across the street that went into the early hours. They also had a young baby. So he was just exhausted, I'm sure. I asked where his last check-in was, and she said, "On final approach to Las Flores." That was one of those trips I would not operate into.
Mm.
So she hadn't heard the next required radio call announcing that he'd landed safely at Las Flores, and that sent shivers down my back. Um, the sun would be setting soon, so we couldn't fly at night. So I contacted a local doctor we knew, and he agreed to fly to Las Flores with me in our spare aircraft at first flight. And I can't believe I'm saying this now, but Ginger went with us because she's a registered nurse.
Mhm.
She left the kids with Yachty. When I think back on it now, I thought I took my wife into an airstrip that I considered to be unsafe,
Right.
and had possibly had a bad accident. We left at first flight the next day, and arriving there, we found the pilot in a hammock placed in a shelter by the side of the strip. They had given him some morphine for pain from their local med kit. In the
Mhm.
accident, the aircraft was totally destroyed. The
Oh my
pilot broke
goodness.
a hip and had some head injuries, and a passenger in the front seat was also injured. We got them all back to Monteria, where the passenger was treated at the local hospital and released, but our program manager had to be flown to Bogota for surgery.
Wow.
The incident started the MAF board examining the safety and value of the Colombia program.
The whole program.
Yeah, yeah, the whole program.
Wow.
Um, well, I'd already put my concerns in writing to the safety department. Yeah, like, as I said, that caused a lot of friction, but, um, now now the unimaginable happened. What
Mhm.
what they thought could not happen, happened. So, yeah, the board felt they had a responsibility, and there was more than just the accident that brought the program to a close. We could have been just transferred right from Colombia to a different program,
Mhm.
in Latin America, but there were no openings at that time.
Like, in some ways, there's something reassuring or affirming in knowing that I wasn't just being ridiculous when I was saying these things are not safe.
Yeah, it's so important to trust our professionalism and our intuition, even in a
Mhm,
different environment, even
mhm.
in an overseas environment.
And yeah, you're dealing with the different cultural perspectives on standards and things, and so it gets messy.
Thank the Lord, our manager, survived and recovered fully.
Yeah.
They're retired from MAF and live in Pennsylvania now and enjoying their own grandkids. So I'm
Mm.
happy for them.
So now I'm going to ask you about a story of something you loved.
Something I loved.
Yes.
Well, I really loved, the utility of the aircraft, the ability to evacuate the very sick or the injured to a larger city where they could receive medical intervention. We did that a lot, and
Mhm.
I think that made every difficulty we faced there more than worth it. Um,
Mhm.
I'll tell you a specific thing that is amazing. At Sisa, in the mountains south of Monteria. It's a very, very isolated mountainous area. I'll tell you how isolated it was. The only way out of, Sisa down to the closest city on the coast, Chiguerodo, was a two-day journey on horseback, navigating, narrow trails, sometimes dangerous mountain trails. Um, and we were the other option, 15 minutes by air versus 2 days on horseback. Yeah,
What? What a big difference. Oh my goodness.
and that's true of a lot of, mountainous areas, isolated terrain like that, all over the world, not just in South America. Well, when I landed at Sisa that day, I was met at the airstrip by the local pastor, and by his side was a young woman carrying a female child who was unconscious.
Oh.
And the woman related the story of how her daughter had been ill for several days with a high fever, confusion, and even occasional convulsions.
Oh, no.
Now, since malaria was endemic in most of that region, my first thought was that she could be suffering from malaria.
Mm-hmm.
So I prayed with them, loaded the mother and daughter in the aircraft along with some other passengers, and we flew to Chigurodo. I radioed ahead for a taxi to meet them. The airstrip coordinator there, another local pastor, paid the taxi driver and the tour off for the hospital in town. I figured I might not ever see them again.
Mm-hmm.
So the rest of that day's work was hard, really hard, worrying for that little girl who was maybe 3 years old. And I figured she had a very slim chance of survival because
Mm-hmm.
others that we'd evacuated for malaria, um, more than half I never saw again, or the pastor would tell me that they'd passed away or something.
Yeah.
Um, but thankfully, she did survive. About 2
Oh,
weeks later, just 2 weeks later, after treatment for cerebral malaria.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, cerebral, it's bad. That's what causes the convulsions.
Yeah.
She and her mother returned to Sisa on my aircraft, and she still had a long road to full recovery, but the anti-malarial medications the hospital provided, were expected to fully heal her.
Wow.
So you can understand that results like that really
Mm-hmm.
made the harder aspects of life in a foreign place seem really small by comparison.
Yeah.
Um, I felt I was accomplishing a very important role in the lives of the people in the remote regions of northern Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
So when the program was closed suddenly following the accident, all of us felt heartsick for the isolated thousands who wouldn't have access to air travel anymore. It was tough.
All right. Well, please tell us something that surprised you.
Oh, there were surprising things about every country we spent time in. Start with Jeddah. The international flavor of that Saudi Arabian city was really surprising.
Hmm.
We lived in a residential compound, and there were families there from not only America, but Somalia, England, Ireland, Jordan,
Hmm.
Egypt, Canada, and even some Palestinian refugees. And all were there for the terrific pay that the kingdom offered professionals to build their infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And we had parties, potlucks, cooking classes.
Oh, yum.
Oh,
Uh,
Somali food is absolutely amazing. So it was a potpourri of international experience. That was great.
yeah.
It,
Yeah.
we had great fellowship there. Um, the driving in Jeddah was horrific. You might say a red light was just a suggestion. Traffic
Uh-huh.
jams were monumental,
Mm-hmm.
but, somehow I never saw a single fatal accident in my 2 years there.
Huh.
I saw accidents, fender
Sure.
benders, but no fatal accidents.
Hmm.
Um, the old town there was amazing. It was a tented series of shops, of every sort. It was called the souk, S-U-Q in Arabic, the souk, which means like a bazaar. And you could find just about everything under the sun there. I'm talking gold jewelry, Radio Shack hobby kits,
Mm-hmm.
every spice under the sun. The smells were incredible. And it was like going back to the 16th century in there.
Except for the Radio Shack kits.
Yeah, except for Radio Shack. Well, just the look of it, it was just it was mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I mean, think Aladdin, and
Right.
it's kinda like that, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was also surprised that I could scuba dive there.
Oh.
Yeah, Jeddah is on the coast of the Red Sea, and the scuba
Oh.
diving was amazing. It's known I didn't know this at the time, but I know now that it's considered one of the best places for scuba diving in the world.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and so There were 2 Americans in my department that were also divers, and we went out, diving almost every weekend together. By the way, the weekend there was not Saturday, Sunday, it was Thursday, Friday.
Right. Was it Shireen that also talked about that when we interviewed her
Yeah.
a few seasons ago?
Yeah, she grew up in Oman.
So in Costa Rica, we were really surprised by the number of tiny food shops on almost every corner of the city.
Uh-huh.
They were called pulperias, and they sold daily essentials, soft drinks, stamps, candy, etc. Ginger would take the kids there after school and buy them a little something almost every day. Um, and in Monteria, Ginger was surprised one day when she went to the butcher shop to buy meat. She saw them drag a beef carcass across a dirty and bloody floor and lift it onto a dirty and bloody counter to remove the cut of beef she had ordered. She was shocked. But she had previously been surprised that Yadi, who sometimes cooked for us, always washed the meat thoroughly before cooking it. We don't do that in America. Now Ginger finally understood. And, that is the way it is in different cultures. It's not wrong. It's just different.
Yeah, so many things that at first we might think it's wrong, but later we realize, okay, well, it's not what I'm used to, but it's just different. Well, speaking of learning different ways of doing things, what can you tell us about what you learned about yourself as a result of your time living abroad?
What did I learn about myself? I learned I was not a patient person. But I learned patience. Like we just talked about, different cultures do things differently. You can get upset or you can adapt. I definitely learned that my supply of patience was inadequate to the task of adapting to different cultures. Everything seems harder in the beginning when you first arrive. The language is, of course, the thing that's just a constant irritant. No matter how much language training you get before you arrive, it is not enough. Believe me, it's not going to be enough. You won't be ready. And you'll have the communication ability of an infant. You'll have a lot of vocabulary memorized, but it's putting the words together that surprises. Patience is mandatory because after a few months of speaking it every day for hours, you'll start to get more confidence with the language. So patience, patience, patience.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. Well, our last question for this first half of your interview, we would just love to hear, what did you learn about the world as a result of your time living abroad?
I'm sure you've heard this a lot on this podcast, Melissa. People really are alike in every culture. They have the same aspirations, the same worries, loves, doubts, and people just want to be treated with respect.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say it, but the ugly American trope is a real thing. We tend to speak more and listen less. So if you can just reverse that and show some real interest in the people you come across in a foreign country, it can be really surprising how quickly we fit in. And thankfully, if you have kids, they're a great icebreaker.
That is absolutely true.
Yes, they are. Cute babies are loved by anybody.
It's another thing that all of our cultures have in common.
Cute babies.
Yep.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Well, thanks, Dave. I am excited to hear the rest of your stories when we come back for part 2. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, for sharing your round-trip stories from Colombia and Saudi Arabia. You love the potpourri of international neighbors in Jeddah and the adventure of flying bush planes in Colombia. Throughout, you realized that patience was mandatory and was definitely a growth area. You discovered that, as you say, we tend to speak more and listen less. If we can just reverse that and show some real interest in the people we come across in a foreign land, it can be surprising how quickly we fit in. So, what happened when Dave and his family returned to the U.S.? You have to make a return trip to our podcast for part 2 of Dave's round trip story.
Want the podcast equivalent of early boarding and first class seating? Be sure to subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed this episode, would you consider sharing it with your fellow globe-trotting friends? We would love to encourage them too. We believe that sharing stories helps our understanding of the world grow larger while the distance between us grows smaller.
As this episode lands, we hope these stories have encouraged you, helped you find some more of your belongings, and made your baggage a little lighter. Thanks so much for listening, friends. We'll see you next time.